Star Wars The Grey War, Chapter 15 by Nathan Brown.
15. Kinza stood in the overcrowded council room as the counselors and a handful of masters watched the message. She felt underqualified to be in this room. She was the only knight in the entire room. The masters around her were the stuff of legend. She assumed she had Master Sifu to thank for her being here now. He had taken a special interest in her ever since Master Rilf had died. "We are the Bogan." The tall, spindly Gulish standing in the foreground declared in a deep, ominous voice. Kinza recognized it as the name for the dark side of the Force the ancestors of both the Jedi and Sith on the deep core world of Tython used. Aishla had been the name for the light side, and at the time the Force users had focused and mediated on both sides of the Force. It spoke volumes that the cult was so well informed on the history of the Force. "We declare a challenge to the order that was once the Jedi, a challenge to the empty husk that once housed the warriors and tours of the galaxy." A flash of anger filled Kinza for a moment, the kind of anger that comes from hearing something that digs deep and hits a nerve of truth. The room around her stiffened for a moment, all recognizing the rumored name the young knights were planning to adopt. Clearly, she wasn't the only one feeling defensive about the man's words. The fact that the cult seemed to have some inside information on the Jedi's workings worried her. Not a true war. One simple battle on any planet or moon of your choosing. Neither order leaves until one is destroyed. If we do not receive a response within 3 months, we will descend upon a populated planet of your precious republic and eradicate every sentient being. So, let us see if any of the rest of the words suddenly faded away as Kinza focused on the large hooded figure behind the speaker. She had assumed he was the second in command, or else a cowardly leader who was afraid to speak and reveal himself to the Jedi. He had felt a strange feeling of familiarity about him, his size and the way he stood. Now she knew. This was Rogan. She was sure of it. "Masters!" she exclaimed suddenly. The room turned and faced her, some with questioning faces. Others were clearly annoyed by her intrusion. Master Liftling sighed audibly and put her hand to her head in a show of frustration. Kinza ignored the dismissal of Master Lifting and continued on. "I'm sorry for my outburst, but I know the man standing in the back. It's Rogan." She paused for a moment, slightly embarrassed. "The Barabel I let escape my custody." "Are you sure, Kinza?" Master Sifu asked her. "How can you tell?" I'm not sure how I know. I can just tell. I'm 100% certain it's him. We need to stop him. I need to stop him." Kinza knew she was being ridiculous, but she couldn't handle the idea that the man she had let escape was leading the attack against the Jedi. "Calm down, Jedi Knight," Master Liftling told her. "We need to take time and discuss before we rush in." Kinza couldn't take it anymore. Discuss? For how long? She knew this wasn't the place for this, but she couldn't help it. Her voice raised as her frustrations with the Jedi came out. "It's already been a week since you received the threat and you haven't even gotten around to discussing it." The Jedi Masters looked at each with concerned, judging looks. Eventually, Master Sifu broke the still silence. "Kinza, please," he began, speaking slowly. His soothing voice calmed her immediately. "We've already talked about it and a few options have been discussed, but we still need to decide. But I assure you, whatever we choose, you will be involved. I know how important stopping this man is to you." Kinza saw the other masters casting questioning glances at each other, second-guessing Master Sifu's decision to involve her. Luckily, they kept silent. "We were able to track the origin of the message to Shireen, a planet on the inner ridge of the Outer Rim." Grand Master Liftling Sifu continued, thinks it would be a good idea to inform the Republic of this threat and descend on the planet with the full force of the Republic. But the Republic is still reeling from the war, a war many of their citizens consider to be our war that they were forced to fight and die in. They may not even agree to help, especially not with all the accusations still floating around about Senator Stan. An awkward silence fell over the room as the Jedi all avoided each other's gazes. Keenza almost groaned aloud. All this time and, of course, the Jedi still hadn't had an official discussion about the assassination everyone blamed the Jedi for. Well, Keenza said, her voice cutting through the terrible silence, we don't have to fight on their terms. If we know where they are, can't we assemble the Jedi quickly and attack in force before they are ready? It would be too risky. They made it much easier than they had to trace the message. It could be a trap. We have no idea how fortified the planet is or what we would be facing when we go there. I firmly believe our only option is to comply with their demands. And just launch into another war? Master Kroll ejected. He was a Karun, a species of dark-skinned, force-sensitive, near-humans from the jungle-filled planet, Aryan Cal. He was younger than most members of the Jedi Council, but he had the reserved demeanor of an older master. Master Liftling spoke up. He's right. Who would fight? The Padawans? The barely trained Jedi Knights? The handful of weary masters have left. Should he bring the younglings to battle as well? Another war would mean the end of the Order completely. You said yourself, Master Sifu, we have no idea what we'd be facing. And what would you have us do? Master Sifu asked, raising his voice for the first time Keenza could remember. Just sit back and watch as they raise planet after planet until someone else steps up and stops them? We are the Jedi and they are followers of the dark side. This is why our order was formed, to protect the citizens of the Republic from this evil. We can't protect the galaxy if we are destroyed by this dark cult, Master Liftling responded, her voice rising to match Master Sifu's. What's the point of this order if we don't even try? We might as well be destroyed. I could go, Keenza yelled, tired of this clearly pointless bickering. I can go in and find out more about this cult and report it back to you. So that way we would have an advantage before the fighting begins. Keenza was fed up with the silences that continually took hold of this council room. They were all sitting still, facing her and waiting for someone else to shoot the idea down. Finally, after what felt like a minute, a human Jedi Master, not on the council, spoke out. But according to you, you've had an interaction with their leader. How can you expect to infiltrate their cult without being recognized? I'll disguise myself. I've done it before when taking down smaller cults, she countered quickly. I can change the color of my skin with body paint and use contacts to change the color of my eyes. I will give myself fake tattoos and perhaps a scar or two. And, she continued before they could bring up more questions, I can easily disguise my force signature. I've done that before as well, so it won't be a problem. It's not that we doubt your abilities, but can you obscure it permanently? All day, for months at a time? Master Sifu asked her. Even a momentary break would compromise the entire mission and most likely cost you your life. Keenza took a moment to think about the question. If she couldn't do it, she would blow the entire operation, putting not only herself but the rest of the Jedi in danger. She wanted more than almost anything to do this herself, but she had to be sure she wasn't letting her pride get in the way. She knew there were dozens of other Jedi who would be able to do it. This was about what was best for the Jedi and the people they would be protecting, not just what soothed her personal guilt and stoked her pride. After a short moment of deliberation, she decided that this would be her mission. She had been called to this council room, a place she clearly didn't belong, and the Force had shown her Rogan. She believed it was for a reason. She was being given the chance to fix her mistake. There was no way she would sit back while her mess destroyed the JED without trying to help. "I can do it," she said confidently. The Jedi Masters looked around at each other, each waiting for someone else to speak up. No one seemed to want to make a decision. Eventually their eyes all settled on Master Sifu, who seemed to be assuming the leadership role of the operation. He paused for a moment before speaking. "Then you'll do it." Scene change. They were useless, every last one of them. He gave them everything they had, yet still they failed him. The Tick. They were pathetic for their failure, and he was pathetic for trusting in such weaklings. For months, maybe years now, who knows, they had been coming up with hundreds of visions, but nothing pertaining to him, nothing he needed. How could they be so useless? Why would the Force give them all of this and yet give them nothing they truly needed? He stopped cold suddenly. The Force wouldn't do that. It was impossible. There had to be something more. A thought rose up in his mind, growing rapidly the more he focused on it. Perhaps they were holding the information back. The Force was desperate to tell him what he needed to know, but they were withholding the information. His followers knew he was weak, and so they were trying to take advantage of it. The longer he thought about it, the more he could feel it, a malicious anger in the air, swirling all about him. None of them could be trusted. Scene change. While his generals were ecstatic, Naman was worried about the growing size of his army. Ever since they had sent the challenge to the Jedi, new Darksiders had been flooding in for the chance to be a part of the army that would defeat the Jedi. He wasn't sure who had let it leak, but at this point, it didn't matter. Almost 300 new members had tried to join the cult. He'd had to turn some people away, disguising it by creating a sort of tryout system and denying entrance to anyone who failed to pass it. So far, almost 100 Darksiders had been added to the ranks of the Bogan. He'd had to create an entire new battalion to accommodate the new members. If they kept growing like this, Naman was afraid they may have a chance against the Jedi. Less than or equal to. Scene change. Kinza stared at herself in the mirror, a habit she had before starting each mission. She had been seeing herself change slowly each mission. Now, however, the change was deliberately drastic. She had dyed her skin with semi-permanent body paint so that it was a dark orange instead of her usual pale yellow. Thick black tattoos roped their way around her body and all the way up to her neck. She even had some on her legs, as the more adventurous Twi'leks had taken to doing. With color contacts, she had made her bright green eyes the customary yellow of a dark side user. She had replaced her traditional brown garb with a deep red robe, the hood pulled low over her face. She'd had to move her leku from where she usually had them hanging behind her to over her chest so her head could fit in the hood. To top it off, she gave herself a couple small scars and a large burn over her left eye that covered the scar Rogan had given her during their first encounter. After all the changes, she could hardly recognize herself. She doubted anyone else could, never mind someone who had only seen her for a few hours. She turned from her mirror and dropped the platform down of her personal ship, an inconspicuous, inexpensive personal cruiser. She took a deep breath and stepped off the ramp onto the planet, preparing for the assault of dark side energy she was used to experiencing. Instead of the oppressive sickness she was used to, all she felt as she took her first steps was a slight feeling of discomfort. Her eyes widened and she panicked. Did this mean she had turned over to the dark side? Why wasn't it affecting her like it normally did? Before she could continue freaking out, she remembered her Force signature. On her long journey to this planet, she had been practicing her new Dark Force signature. It made sense that she would be more used to feeling the dark side of the Force around her. She relaxed in time to notice her ship was surrounded by hooded, masked figures she assumed were guards. She was unprepared for this, Kinza thought to herself. As she walked up to the masked guards, she'd expected to have more time before she was inspected. Even though it didn't make her sick, the darkness on this planet was still astounding. She could feel it all around her. With every breath she felt like it was filtering into her soul. She wasn't used to being surrounded by so many Darksiders. It was like the antithesis of being back in the Jedi Temple. "I'm here to join the Bogan," she told the two mysterious figures before her. They looked at each other for a moment and Kinsa felt something pass between them. "Come with us," one of them told her. His deep voice resonated from behind the mask. "You must be tested." Kinsa once again felt unprepared. She hadn't expected there to be a tryout. The fact that they had a trial for their applicants made her think more highly of the organization and skill of their army. She followed behind the two figures as they led her to a gigantic wooden room. It looked so strange and out of place, a random wooden box with no ceiling in the middle of a dry field. They walked around to the entrance. It was a small door that opened to a long hallway, but she couldn't see past a large wall blocking her path. "You need to make it through to the end," the man said simply. "No weapons." He held out his hand to her. Kinsa unclipped her lightsaber, her yellow crystal replaced with a synthetic red one, and handed it to the masked man. He took it from her and gestured for her to begin. As she bent down, ready to sprint down the long hallway, she noticed the reflection off a large pool of what she assumed was water just before the high wall. She exploded forward, using the force to propel her at a blinding speed. The wall rushed by her side in streaks and within a few seconds she came to the pool. She jumped, using her force-augmented speed to clear over the water. She slammed hard into the wooden wall, absorbing the energy with her arms and legs. Before gravity could take hold of her, Kinsa dug her grippy boots into the wall and shot up with all her might, flying over to the other side of the wall. She started falling blindly and found herself quickly descending on a row of metal spikes. Thinking quickly, Kinsa kicked backwards, pushing off the wall behind her with both feet. She tucked herself into a ball and managed to barely skirt over the tall metal spikes. She landed on the hard ground and rolled to her feet. As soon as she started to run again, Kinsa felt something at her side. She turned to her left to see a blaster bolt screaming towards her head. Instinctively, she spun and fell, flopping face first into the ground. She avoided the blaster bolt and, in return, she slammed her face against a stone jutting out from the ground. It cut into her cheek and, as she slid, it continued scraping into her face. No doubt, it would add to her various scars, both real and fake. Jagged rocks cut into her robes as she slid along the rough ground. As she slid, she heard something break and feared she had lost another tooth. After a couple seconds, her head cleared up and she pushed off with her hands, springing back to her feet. Her tongue searched her mouth as she ran. "Yup," she thought to herself, as she felt the jagged, broken gap in one of her bottom front teeth. "There goes the first casualty of this war." Without warning, two men brandishing lightsabers fell from the open ceiling and blocked her path. Without slowing, Kinsa gathered force for a moment before releasing it in a wave at the two men. The large human on the right was pushed to the side. He bounced off the wooden wall, causing it to bend and splinter, and then fell still into the dirt. The smaller man, however, absorbed Force energy and transformed it into something more lethal. He held on to her power for a moment, then released it in a thin stream of bright blue lightning. Kinsa was still extremely uncomfortable with her ability to control lightning. Most of the cults she had dismantled had few or no members strong enough to control the deadly dark side ability. In a rush, she dashed to the side rather than tried to deal directly with the lightning. Her move was overdone and she bumped into the wall, not hard enough to hurt her but hard enough to trip her up. She fell forward, barely able to tuck into a roll before slamming her face into the ground once again. Just as she was getting to her feet, the small human lunged at her, his lightsaber extended. This time Kinza didn't dive out of the way. She waited until he was close and fell back to her unarmed combat training. She swung her right arm out, connecting her forearm to the man's wrist and forcing his arm and lightsaber harmlessly wide. His momentum was too much for him to stop, however, and he continued towards her. She brought her left elbow up so it slammed into his chin as he sped towards her. The man was stopped cold and knocked off his feet. His forward momentum caused him to flip backwards, landing flat on his face behind her as she ran on. Kinza left the two men behind and continued her run. She wasn't sure how quickly she had to finish this course to make it into the army, but she wasn't about to test the limits. She almost zigzagged ahead as yet another man dropped from the sky and charged towards her. Kinza refused to slow down for this one. She ran straight forward, gaining speed as if she meant to ram into him, waiting for him to attack first. When he did, she easily ducked under his predictable stab and used the force to augment a punch aimed for his knee. The blow connected and she felt the bones shatter beneath her fist. The man screamed out in pain and dropped to the ground, holding his knee. Kinza ran on without looking back. A few back-to treatments and he would be fine. The previously straight path made a sharp left turn and she veered quickly to the left to follow it. She was expecting something big to surprise her after the turn, but still she was unprepared for what was facing her. A barrage of blaster bolts, so many of them they almost seemed to form a solid wall, came flying towards her. She started to reach for her lightsaber before remembering she had given it up. She ran on, and used her heightened adrenaline to gather force. Just before the bolts shredded into her, she created a shield around herself with the force, similar to what she did when she cushioned herself from a fall, but much more intense. With a deep breath filled with hope and fear, she jumped, holding herself horizontal and spinning in an effort to provide less surface area for the blaster bolts to hit. She practically flew through the assault, her leku sticking out like chopper blades as she rotated. Any of the red streaks that came into her path simply disintegrated as their energy was absorbed by the hedge of protection she had created around herself. To her slight surprise and great relief, she made it through without any injury. She continued sailing past the guns that had fired at her, but then she started to fall. The ground rushed up at her as she lost altitude, too quickly for her to adjust. She landed hard on the other side of the spitting turrets. She stuck her hands out to catch herself, but she was going too fast. Her wrist bent and she felt certain it snapped. She turned her face to the side just as it burrowed into the ground. She felt the tiny rocks cut into the right side of her face as she slid. The impact sent dust flying into her mouth, sending her into a fit of coughing. She lay there for a moment completely exhausted. Her adrenaline was gone and she felt as if she had somehow used up all her force. Normally, she could draw on the living force around her to rejuvenate herself, but she was hesitant to try and draw on the force in a place of such darkness. Her wrist throbbed painfully and her mouth felt dry and gritty. Slowly, she recovered and felt she was ready to stand up. Holding her left wrist close to her body, she pushed with her right hand, moving to all fours. As her legs scraped across the ground, a sharp stabbing pain in her thigh stopped her. She looked down to see a stone of concerning size jutting out from her right leg just under her hip. How could one place H Avenue so many criffing stones? She asked under her breath. Perhaps they were placed here on purpose. She rolled to her left side, still not wanting to put any weight on her left wrist, and reached down to take hold of the stone. Gritting her teeth, she painfully jerked the stone from her leg. A slow flow of blood poured from the deep hole in her flesh. Kinza took a couple of calming breaths before falling back onto her stomach and trying again. This time, she ignored the pain in her leg and got to her knees. She got her right foot under her and forced herself to stand up, walking unsteadily out of the wooden box back into the open field. 2 guards She had no way to tell if they were the same ones that had brought her here, stood still and stoic outside the obstacle course. She walked towards them, moving slowly, trying to stand straight and keep the pain of every movement out of her face. Very impressive, one of the guards told her, surprising Kinsel with a sweet, female voice. Almost none make it the whole way through and even less do so with such ease and speed. Kinzer was extremely confused. She definitely didn't feel she had done any of that with ease or speed. She felt like she had been lying at the exit for at least 5 minutes. So what happens to the people who don't make it? She asked. It seemed harsh, even for followers of the dark side, to kill someone for not completing such a difficult task that apparently almost no one completed. Well, if WE believe they make it far enough, we let them sleep it off and they are invited to join the Bogan. Those were only stun bolts and the people you fought are under strict orders not to kill. Our location is no secret, so we have no reason to threaten or kill those who fail, they are simply turned away. The woman replied. The Lord Marshal will want to see her, the masked woman said, turning to the other guard. Now Kinsel was worried. Before, she had been working hard to make sure she made it into the army, but now she thought she should have done worse. She didn't want to be noticed. She just wanted to fit into the middle of the army, not stand out. The silent guard nodded. Follow us, the woman told her, with a possible hint of kindness in her voice. The two guards turned and started walking towards a large group of tents. She followed behind them, her worry rising with each painful step. She was confident with her ability to disguise herself in a crowd, but she hadn't expected or prepared to meet Rogan by herself. She would have to be absolutely perfect. Scene change. After the failed assassination attempt, Naaman had stepped up his training, even going so far as to transform his personal tent into a training room. He had become too soft in his time away from Darth Cognus and his regimented training. The planning was basically completed and now all that was left was tiny, minute details that weren't on any real consequence. He refused to deal with such foolishness. So now, instead of talking around his table, he and his generals spent their time in this room training together, honing their skills and learning techniques to teach their troops. If there was anything to be dealt with, it was discussed with haggard breath during the training. At the moment, he was simply training by himself, working his sequences, practicing new defense techniques. He'd learned through research that the new ability he'd accidentally learned was known to the Jedi as Tudaminis. It was the practice of using the Force to absorb or dissipate energy such as a blaster bolt, lightning, or a lightsaber with your body. It was apparently extremely rare to be able to block a direct lightsaber strike. He figured he owed that at least in part to his thick scales. He stopped suddenly when he felt someone approaching. After the assassination attempt, he had also become more perceptive of his surroundings. As he paused, he heard soft steps crunching the dry grass outside his tent. He too ran to the entrance just as two elites walked in, escorting a scuffed Twi'lek he didn't recognize. Only the elites, the guards of their compound and the best fighters in the army, were allowed to enter his personal tent without permission. Nathiera, one of the female elites, addressed him first. Lord Marshal, this is Lorene. She completed the course in record time. I know you've been searching for a general to lead the new troops and I believe she could be a candidate. She showed great control over the Force, impressive quick decision skills and she kept a cool head under pressure. Nervousness seeped from the woman's pores. Naaman could smell it. He reached with the Force and studied the woman. He felt her strength, her courage and determination. He could feel her yearning for power, the desire for more that was the same within all Darksiders, buried deep inside. He felt something else buried deep inside her, some secret she was keeping locked away. He stepped towards the woman and placed his palm lightly on her sweaty forehead. He felt her stiffen at his touch, reinforcing his belief that she was hiding something. He delved into her, searching through her soul. Her very being flew past him, her pain and anger, her hopes and beliefs. Then he found what he was looking for. As he dug deeper and deeper into her, he suddenly felt the light side within her. She was holding it locked within her, hiding within a shell of darkness. He penetrated the layer of false darkness and was suddenly surrounded by the sickly sweetness of the light side. He was about to leave her, his spirit repulsed by the pool of light he was drowning in, when he felt recognition. He'd been around this Jedi before. This was his captor and momentary master, Kinza. Naman went back into himself and stared down at the Jedi. Now that he knew who she truly was, he could see beneath her disguise. He could feel the artificial makeup of her dark force signature, and he recognized her physical form beneath her new, darker appearance. He considered what to do with her now. If this was a true army, he would either kill her or feed her false information and let her send it back to the Jedi. This situation, however, was much more complicated. He wanted the Jedi to win the coming war. Besides, the fake darkness she had conjured for his benefit had more than a hint of reality to it. He had felt her hunger for greater things and her disillusionment of the light side. Naman was interested to see if he could feed the darkness inside her while at the same time making sure the Jedi defeated his sham army. No, she will not lead, he declared. She has great potential, but she is not ready. She still has a lot to learn. Doreen, you will become an elite. You, he said, pointing at Nathiera. You will teach her and train her and report her progress to me. Forgo all your guard duties and work to integrate her into your squads until the attack. He saw Kinza's shoulders slump in relief. Nathiera nodded her head in obedience, and all three of them turned and left his tent. Naman went back to his training, extremely happy and interested with this new development. Scene change. Darth Millennial sat alone in his chamber, hiding from the world of liars and traitors on the other side of the large stone doors. He was so certain of it now, the blinders of trust on his eyes had been lifted. These evil fools he once called followers were plotting to kill him. The gift that had been with him nearly since birth, the ability that helped him survive as a mutant, shunned by his people, had not abandoned him. It wasn't the Force that had betrayed him. It was the disgusting worms he himself had created. He had taken them from nothing, and now it was coming back to bite him. He had treated them with kindness and love, rescuing them from a life of unimportant mediocrity. He gave them a chance to be someone, to have an effect, the greatest gift you can ever receive. If he had left them where they would have only been ridiculed, pushed down and trod upon, instead of being held up before the plebeians like the gods they were. The average and plain always fail to see greatness, all they see is difference. That was the life they were destined to live without him. That is what he had rescued them from. He was sure now that his vision was not from the Force. He had nothing to fear from the monstrous alien scum. The Force knew that, and it would not warn him about something that posed no threat to him. The false visions were from his evil followers. They were projecting the image into his mind and trying to break him down, trying to erode him because they were afraid to attack him directly. He would waste time in preparing for a false threat from the outside when he needed to protect himself from within. He talked to himself, the only one he could trust, as he scoured through his tomes and scrolls, pieces he had managed to steal from his master before he had fled from her wrath, as well as some things he'd found since he'd created the cult. He was searching for any mention of something that would grant him what he needed to defeat those fools. One of the many follies of his old master was her distaste for talismans, objects imbued by past Sith Lords with their strength that granted the wearer a more solid link to the Force. Darth Millennial, however, did not have such ridiculous prejudices. His fingers were stuffed with rings, and he had necklaces and robes that greatly increased his connection to the mistress. However, he knew none of this was enough. He needed to find something greater.